Today is the Reptilian Special, so get ready to lay some eggs while sprawled across the warm rock somewhere in the desert, or not. Just listen to this podcast where you normally do, because we're going to cover some crazy reptilian stories. First off, what happens when a lizard man goes toe-to-toe with America's favorite shape-shifting warrior. And then we take a look at a smaller story, the story of a family, a father and a son, simply trying to make their way through life. But when the father is replaced by a shape-shifting reptilian, this young man has a choice to make. Does he continue to hang out with his father, or does he risk his life to uncover the truth? Today on Dead Rabbit Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I hope you guys are having a great day too. I hope you have a belly full of eggs. You're like, Jason, we're not actually reptilians listening to this podcast. Well, you never know. One or two of you guys might be. But I hope you guys have a nice belly full of eggs. Whether you ate them because they came out of a chicken, or you are a shape-shifting reptilian who's about to give birth, who's about to spawn 1,000 children this afternoon. This is going to be our Reptilian Special, and who else but to have on our Reptilian Special, walking into Dead Rabbit Radio Command, everyone give it up for our newest Patreon supporter, Comrade Dragon. Woohoo! Yeah, wee! There's like communist music playing in the background as Comrade Dragon is walking in. I don't know what communist music sounds like. Probably normal music, less electric guitar. Communism music. Comrade Dragon's walking into Dead Rabbit Radio Command. Now, funny story, and you guys are all welcome to do this. Very few people do this because there is a pretty big caveat. Comrade Dragon, when they joined the Patreon months ago, I mean, honestly, it's probably been about 5 months since they joined. They requested, hey, can I be on an episode with reptilian stories? And you're more than welcome to do that when you sign up for the Patreon. The problem is that I might not be able to find any, right? I really try to find the best stuff for this show. I could throw in some reptilian stuff together back then, but, you know, we want to make the show, we want to have good content. So really this stuff, I in the back of my head, I was like, okay, if I come across good reptilian stuff, Comrade Dragon, you'll be on it. And I've been doing this. That was so long ago that Comrade Dragon actually canceled the Patreon and is recently subscribed to the Patreon. He's probably like, do I have to get this guy's attention again? No, I was fully aware. You're at the top of my list. I just wanted to make sure. Every so often someone will say, can I be on a pirate episode? I think that was someone. And I go, yeah, sure. But it took quite a while for me to find a good pirate story, right? I want good stuff. Not just for the Patreon, but for you guys. So, Comrade Dragon, that's why it took so long. You are going to be our captain, our pilot this episode. If you guys can't support the Patreon, if you guys can't support the merch store, I totally understand. I really, really do. Just help spread the word about Dead Rabbit Radio. That helps out so much. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everyone you know. Dead Rabbit Radio is your favorite paranormal show because that can help the show grow. Also, alternatively, if you are a reptilian, if you are giving birth to hundreds of babies, promote the show to your babies. Put little headphones on their little reptilian ears. Let's get this party started. Comrade Dragon, what's our most communist vehicle? Comrade Dragon, I'm going to go ahead and toss you the keys to the Dead Rabbit dirigible because I just can imagine a huge hammer and sickle on it. Everyone climb on board the Dead Rabbit dirigible as Comrade Dragon takes us up and away in this big, beautiful blimp. We're leaving behind Dead Rabbit Radio Command. Why don't you fly us all the way out to the Midwest? Nice, leisurely ride in this big blimp. Comrade Dragon, a reptilian himself, I'm assuming, piloting this thing. We're headed out to the Midwestern portion of the United States. It's October 2023, so a fairly recent story. And before we get started, I want to say that I got this as a recommendation from the last 747. Thanks for sending the story over. Really appreciate your guys' recommendations. We're headed out to the Midwest where we're going to meet a young woman named Katie. And Katie said, to kind of give you an idea of where I'm at, it's pretty rural. She said the nearest neighbor is about a half a mile away. So we have a lot of space, and that's kind of what she enjoys. She's living there. She has 2 cats. I mean, after yesterday's episode, she may want to reconsider that, but she has 2 cats and an Australian Shepherd named Banjo, a dog. Not like an Australian guy who's taking care of the sheep. A dog named an Australian Shepherd. So we have this Australian Shepherd dog sitting on the porch with Katie on this particular day in October 2023. They're sitting there, and a lot of times they would just sit there and look out at her yard. The way she put it out is she goes, I had about a half acre of property behind my house, and I had a shed near the property line, and my property line ended right around where the woods began. So then you had this vast tract of woods, and then that was part of a neighbor's property who was, again, half a mile away. And her and Banjo are sitting out on this deck. Actually, Banjo is doing more than sitting. He has to go to the bathroom. So she comes out, and she's going to sit on the deck while Banjo goes to the bathroom. And he's looking for a place to go. She goes, he'd always go on one side of the house or the other. He wouldn't want to go in the yard in front of us. But this time when we come out, he starts acting kind of weird. Like, she knows he has to go to the bathroom. He's given all the signs that he has to go to the bathroom. But once they go outside, he's just standing there and looking out at the tree line. He's not beginning a search for the perfect place to go to the bathroom on either side of the house. He's just looking out at the tree line. And Katie thinks, well, this is kind of a remote area. We do have wildlife here. It could be a deer walking by, possibly a wild turkey, some other animal that is catching Banjo's attention. But Banjo's normally a barker. He likes to bark a lot, and he's not doing that. In fact, he's actually pressing his body very closely to Katie's and emitting a low growl. Katie says, and she says this multiple times in her story, she goes, listen, you're not going to believe this, right? She goes, I barely believe it. You're not going to believe this. It's going to sound totally insane. And she understands that, because it does sound insane, but in the world of the weird, everything's on the table. She goes, it's daytime. I look out at the tree line where my property is, and walking by, like in between the trees and her property. She's not completely obscured in the forest. It's not simply a dark shadow. She can see this thing pretty clearly. What she sees is a lizard man. She said it had the snout of a lizard. It had like the elongated face. It had a huge tail. It had a humanoid body covered in scales, completely naked. And she said this thing had to be at least 11 feet tall. So again, it's not something that she's just seen a shadow of off in the distance. She can clearly see the scales. She can see its musculature move as it's walking. She goes, I know it's over 7 feet for sure, because that's how tall my shed is. And it towered over my shed. And she goes, the minimum this thing was 11 feet tall. Which, with reptilian stories, that can happen. I know we talk a lot about shape-shifting reptilians in the paranormal world, conspiracy world, specifically Queen Elizabeth shape-shifting into a reptile. That story's kind of doesn't work anymore now that she's dead. But you think of a human shifting into a reptilian human. Reptilians generally are 7 feet tall. Like, that is the kind of go-to height for a reptilian humanoid creature. So they tower over 99% of humanity at their average size. This one, she said, had to be at least 11 feet tall. It's walking by the tree line. Now it makes sense why Banjo's freaking out. She's trying to make sense of it, but there's another thing going on here that her mind really can't comprehend. She's watching this giant lizard man walk by. It's about a half an acre away. Closer than you would want anything that was 11 feet tall to be. but it was also dragging something. She said in one hand, it had its scaly grip around something's throat. Something big and furry. Katie's watching this lizard man drag this body across the ground. And in her mind, she goes, that must be a bear. I mean, based on the size of it, there has to be a bear. This, whatever. I mean, imagine all this stuff is going through your head at once. Some of these details she's probably thought about after the fact as well. But again, this has only happened. It hasn't even been a year since this story happened. But, you know, sometimes you replay events and you may remember other parts. But in the moment, she's like, what in the world? What is that thing dragging? It's huge. It has to be a bear. Now, what's interesting is Katie states in her narrative, she said, there's no bears around here. So it can't be a bear. I would argue there's no lizard men around there either, but you're clearly seeing something that shouldn't exist, but does. And she goes, it's not a bear that it's dragging. It's as big as a bear at least, but it can't be a bear. Bears aren't around here. And as it's walking by, right, as it's getting closer, it's not walking towards her, but as she's seeing it walk this property line and she's getting a better look at this thing, she realizes what the lizard man is dragging. And she goes, for lack of a better word, the only way I can describe what I saw, this lizard man was dragging the corpse of a werewolf. She says that's exactly what it looked like. She says when she went to go research some stuff online later on, she started finding pictures of what a humanoid reptilian would look like, and she popped up pictures from that Amazing Spider-Man movie, and she goes, well, kind of looked like that, except without the clothes, and it had a longer snout, and it wasn't covered in web fluid. Spider-Man wasn't in the background. She said when I began looking at, because of course werewolves aren't real, that's what she's thinking. Katie's like, lizard people aren't real, werewolves aren't real, what's going on? She started to look stuff up online, because again, you'd think, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe everyone else believes in werewolves and they exist now. She said the terminology I'd find online a lot was DOGMAN. So a humanoid, canine, mixture, hybrid. DOGMAN is basically werewolf. It just sounds different. If you tell people, I think I saw a werewolf yesterday, they're going to think you're crazy. If you tell people I saw DOGMAN yesterday, less people will think you're crazy. We call it the leprechaun dilemma, or the leprechaun paradox here on the show. You say your house is haunted, people will believe you. If you tell them you caught a leprechaun, no one will believe you. But they both kind of exist in the same world of the paranormal. So she uses the word DOGMAN, but then she keeps just calling it a werewolf because that's what it is, right? It's a half human, half canine creature. It's huge. As the reptilian is walking by this property line, it stops. And she says when it stopped, its tail stopped swishing as well. This massive tail that would just slide back and forth just stops as well. And the reptilian turns and looks towards Katie and Banjo. And she said it stared at us for just a couple seconds. And the feeling she got from it was complete indifference. The reptilian didn't care that it was being observed. It didn't care that there were two people or one person and a dog on the porch. It didn't care. It had completely no cares in the world about them or being observed or anything. She said it felt like we were nothing compared to this. At that point, the reptilian, still gripping the werewolf by the throat, turns and begins to walk deeper into the woods until it eventually vanished from their sight. Katie says she has not seen it since October 2023. She said for a while afterwards, Banjo was a little out of sorts, right? He didn't really... He's a lot. Can I go to the bathroom in the front yard, bro? It's kind of spooky out there. But she said after a couple weeks, he kind of, was able to start playing around and going to the bathroom like normal in the backyard. But for a while, he was pretty scared by it. And in that time as well, Katie was trying to research it because you think, what did I just see? This was posted on Phantoms and Monsters, the website by Lon Strickler. He has been at it for years. I always say a lot of good stuff about this website. I feel like I don't ever say enough because it's really good. I also just realized, I don't know why it took me so long to pick this up. Phantoms and Monsters has a podcast as well. Lon Strickler has been doing this, I think, since 2022. So he reads a lot of these accounts that he posts online. So I'll put a link for that in the show notes. You can check out his podcast as well, Phantoms and Monsters. He got it, Lon Strickler got it from a account that was posted on Cryptids Canada. Underneath the title, 12-foot tall lizard man with a dog man was the title of that original post. It's an interesting story because what we are seeing is the aftermath of a more interesting story, I would argue. We're seeing a reptilian dragging the dead body of a werewolf. Where I want to hear that story. I want to hear the story about how a reptilian fought a werewolf. And there's a couple different origins for what reptilians are. Some people say they're aliens. Some people say they're interdimensional entities that are on Earth. Some people say they evolved alongside humanity in some sort of secret society, secret civilization. You don't have to have an inner Earth. You don't have to have a hollow Earth simply to have a vast cave system underneath our feet. A lot of people confuse the two. Hollow Earth is this idea that there's another sun in the middle of the planet or another heat source, and there are these beautiful cities, sparkling cities, a whole new civilization that you can reach by going in through Antarctica. The other theory is that there's vast unmapped cave systems all over the world. That's true. We know that for a fact. And something could have evolved alongside of us in those caves, or was on the surface at some time and pushed underground. But not like Hollow Earth underground, just in these vast cave systems. We don't know where reptilians come from. Werewolves, I think, that gets a little more magical based. If you take the idea of a human being able to shift into a werewolf, even if you could scientifically say, yeah, it's possible for a reptilian species to evolve somewhere else, either in the galaxy or somewhere hidden on our own planet, you can kind of scientifically put those things together. Person turning into a werewolf, man, full moon, hair poking out of his head, I must feast. That's a little more far-fetched, right? That, to be fair, I love werewolves. It's a little more far-fetched for a man to be able to shift into a werewolf, because you figure, my whole thing is that, yeah, I guess magic would be the answer, but wouldn't that dude constantly be covered in stretch marks and, have, the baggiest skin? Maybe not the first couple times he shifts into the werewolf, but after about 4 or 5 years doing it every month, your skin's gonna get a little loose, right? Your skin's gonna be like, Jason, it's magic. He's not worried about, has to go into the doctor and go oh, can you fix my skin? It's so baggy. But make sure you finish it before the full moon. It's coming up tonight. He probably shouldn't have shown up here so late at 5 p.m. I love werewolves, though, so I have a soft spot, even though it may be less plausible than reptilian. However, this is what I'm kind of getting at. Werewolves are, as far as we accept the general lore of a werewolf, they're human. They're a human turning into a wolf. And yes, while they may eat people, they're still human. And anyone who's listened to this podcast for any amount of time know I'm pro-human. So if I had to root for a fight between a werewolf and a reptilian, right? We put them in a ring. Tell me that would be the best UFC fight ever. You have a werewolf and a reptilian. I'm rooting for the werewolf because he used to be a dude. And he'll be a dude tomorrow. But here's the story says that's the bad call, right? Do not put money on the werewolf. This reptilian demolished this guy. Demolished him. Because it wasn't even that she was like, oh, the reptilian, he was all bloody, he had a big black eye, his little arm was in a sling. No, he's just casually walking around in the middle of the day carrying this dead werewolf. It would make sense that a werewolf probably couldn't pierce that type of scaly armor. But it's kind of disheartening, right? I do love my werewolves. Maybe a couple of vampires could have taken him down. No, that's the thing. Like, I love vampires too, but a reptilian would just destroy pretty much any human-based hand-to-hand combatant I could think of. And I'm even considering the magical ones. Maybe like a leprechaun. A reptilian might have a hard time catching a leprechaun. Because he's like, I'm over here. No, I'm over here. He's like teleporting around and stuff like that. And I was like, I mean, unless the reptilian makes some wishes, eventually the leprechauns are going to get tired. Reptilian's going to eat it. These things might be that powerful, that kind of our most fearsome, humanity's most fearsome enemies that used to be human or lived alongside humans in that aspect, like fairy folk and all that stuff. An alien, I mean, think about it. It's like an invasive species. If I took a box of cats to New Zealand, I would become king. I would just unleash all my cats and they would just devour every bird and mouse and frog as far as the eye can see. And I have a shirt that says Cat King. And I'm like, bow down to me, New Zealanders. And they're like, we're sorry, my honor. We're sorry. And I was like, yes, it's my lord, by the way, not my honor. Cats, eat him. He doesn't know my real name. It's like an invasive species. What if that's what it is with these reptilians? Like, imagine humanity has... Let's take the idea that reptilians are alien, either from another dimension or from outer space. Humanity has created some of our greatest warriors and some of our greatest foes alongside of us as we are evolving. And so we do have giants, we do have werewolves and vampires, Creature from the Black Lagoon, maybe. I mean, that's really just a movie. But Frankenstein comes walking out, finding a reptilian. Think about any character, I mean, outside of like Zeus or something like that. I'm talking about like cryptid. Take any cryptid through human history, and I bet you anything, it could not beat an 11-foot tall reptilian. Like, no Greek mythology, not like fighting the Minotaur. Although, to be fair, I think it would make short work of a Minotaur as well. Because even if you took something like what do we know about werewolves? What do we know about Bigfoots? While they do have some sense of, like, community. Well, Bigfoots, werewolves not so much, unless you're reading those werewolf novels about all the gay werewolves that are giving each other babies. It's like a whole subculture of gay werewolves who impregnate other gay werewolves, so the dudes are giving birth to future gay werewolves. It's called mpreg, male pregnancy. So it's just like gay werewolves, and it's all about like the alphas coming in, and like you have like this tribe of werewolves living in Detroit, and then another guy comes in on a motorcycle, and he's like, oh, that werewolf over there looks awfully sexy. But he's in human form. It's just some guy working at Domino's Pizza. And then the motorcycle guy comes in and he goes, hey, I'd like a pizza. And they're like, what topping do you want on it? And he's like, you. And then the motorcycle guy turns into a werewolf and all the customers flee. Ah! And then the werewolf hops over the counter and he goes, I know you're a werewolf. I know you're nothing but a beta werewolf. Come back to me, to my lair. I'm going to put a baby gay werewolf inside of that belly of yours. And then they hop on. This isn't a real story. You're like, Jason, wow, this is really detailed. Did you read or possibly write this earlier today? No, it's a whole... You're like, that's just too detailed, Jason, to come off the top of your head. It's a whole subgenre called mpreg, werewolf mpreg. What was I talking about? What was I talking about? How did I get on that topic? Oh, yeah, okay. So, werewolves aren't very social animals unless they're impregnating each other somewhere in Detroit. But like Bigfoot, right? They do have some sense of civilization. They're not just beasts. They have some sort of human or consciousness, right? They can communicate with people and things like that. Vampires definitely have human intelligence. Werewolves are kind of close to it, but the beast nature takes over, especially when they walk into a Domino's Pizza. The reptilian has conquered the stars. Like, if you see a reptilian near you, that guy has, I mean, let's forget the evolve alongside human thing. Still, they would be equal of human intelligence at that point, if not slightly ahead. But if they came from another dimension, or if they've come from the stars, they have knowledge that far outshines anything humanity as a collective has even come close to capturing. So all of our beasts, all of our cryptids, all of our monsters are as smart as humans. Or less. And the reptilian is, I mean, you couldn't even quantify it. I couldn't say 10 times smarter than a human or 1,000 times smarter than a human. To even understand how different dimensions are connected, like you can kind of make that concept, but eventually you got to break out the chalk and start figuring out the mathematical formulas. For a reptilian, it's just like turning on a light switch. They've conquered it so much that the technology is, it's everyday to them. It means nothing. It's like putting on your shoes. So they would outthink us. They would out-strategize us, and they just have raw brute strength. That's what's always made the reptilians so fearsome. I feel like the conspiracy theories has kind of watered down the reptilian conspiracy theory, because you go, oh, what can Queen Elizabeth do? Right? I'm taken to Buckingham Palace, and she's like, oh, Jason, we've been looking for you. You need to finish this novel. I'm stuck. What will happen when the biker clan meets more betas in Detroit? And I was like, I didn't write that, ma'am. That was a pseudonym. But what are you going to do? I'm not going to finish writing that book that I never started writing in the first place. And she's like, ah! And she turns into a lizard. Okay, now instead of facing a 4-foot tall, 98-year-old woman, I'm looking at I don't know, let's give him 2 more feet. I'm looking at a 6-foot tall reptilian that spent most of its time crouched over, slathered in makeup, and mumbling edicts to the people of Britain. You take that, British listeners. They're like, what? Your president can barely stand up. So anyways, before we mock each other's leaders, Queen Elizabeth, now in reptilian form, is doddering towards me, and I was like, this isn't impressive. This isn't impressive. The fact that these humans can, every so often, their eyes turn into, like, reptilian eyes, I'm like, boring. Send in the 11... First off, let me be clear, I'm not actually inviting these into my life, but let's say I'm hanging at your house for the afternoon, and I sit back in your chair and I go ahead, send in the 11-foot tall reptilian warriors. I want to see what you guys are really about. Because the thing is that they are so fearsome. Even when you read alien accounts of them, they are probably the number one source of the statement that I say going, we only hear the survivor stories. Think about all the encounters that we have with people meeting gray aliens and then staying alive to tell the story, being like, yeah, abducted by gray aliens. Maybe something good happened, maybe something bad happened, but I'm here to tell the story. Versus the reptilians. Right, we don't have a lot of reptilian alien abduction stories, but we have a lot of stories of reptilian aliens. So that should tell you that if you get abducted by the reptilians, you have a lower threshold of actually making it back to tell about it. It's crazy to think that, like, again, you running into a werewolf in the middle of the woods would probably be one of the worst things that could happen to you. But a werewolf running into a reptilian sounds like it might be the worst thing that could happen to a werewolf. But to the reptilian, it's nothing. It just snapped its neck. I mean, I'm sure there was some sort of fight, but the reptilian left unscathed and was calmly dragging it through the forest. Fascinating story. I do enjoy a good reptilian story, but, you know, like Comrade Drag, it takes a while to find them. I came across one recently. I'll just put it in the show notes. A guy got it, because there wasn't a lot to it, but a guy got abducted by reptilians, and they were kind of like pushing him around. He's on this spaceship. He's like locked into this chair. They're kind of being a jerk to him and stuff like that. While this is going on, though, they're just kind of harassing him. They basically, reptilians are jerks. They abducted him just to kind of bully him as he's strapped into this chair. And then the end of the account was, as he was up there, there was a sliding door. There was an area that had a sliding door, and at one point it opened it up, and it was full of human remains like hanging off of meat hooks, or human remains stored for future food use. So that's what you get when you encounter a reptilian. I'll put that full story in the show notes. It's maybe only a paragraph long. I didn't really leave much detail out of it, but that all being said, Comrade Dragon, these are your compatriots. I hope you can rein them in at some point. Comrade Dragon, let's go ahead and toss you the keys to the world-famous Carpenter Copter. We are leaving behind the Midwest. Why don't you fly us all the way out to a house in the suburbs? You know what? For this episode, you've probably been wondering what was up with the art the whole time, the episode art. That's actually a Reptilian Clinton action figure that I recently purchased from an old friend of mine who has this art business called Mcforrys Fartworks is the name of the business. I'll put the link in the show notes. It's really cool. He does limited runs of custom action figures. So when I saw this one, this Reptilian Clinton action figure, I bought it. I'm going to be featuring it in the background of my future videos. It's totally awesome. He also does this really cool thing where he will custom paint you as a garbage pail kid. So you contact him and tell him what you want, and then he'll do it. He'll paint you as a garbage pail kid. I think that's pretty dope. And he has a ton of other action figures. I think right now, the last I looked, was he had a giant... I don't know how big it is actually, but you remember Krang from the old Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon? He has one of those, but it's Grimace. And instead of the removable brain in Krang's stomach, it's a chicken nugget with arms. So it's a giant Grimace robot with a little chicken. He does lots of cool stuff. He did a whole run of like G.G. Allen action figures. Does a lot of serial killer stuff. He goes to horror conventions, and he's an awesome guy. I hung out with him way back in the day, and I'm glad to see that he's doing well. And what an awesome, cool little addition to my wall of weird, my Reptilian Clinton action figure. But if you guys are looking for a insane gift or just something for yourself, check out Mcforrys Fartworks. He doesn't know. This isn't a paid ad. He didn't know I was going to talk about it. Really cool website. Anyways, we're flying out to this house. The year is 1995. We're about to meet a young man. We don't have his exact name. We're going to call him Phil. He's 15 years old. And he's making his way through life as best he can with his dad, who we will call George. Now, George is retired military, and they're living together in this home. And Phil doesn't really know what George, his father, did in the military. He doesn't really have much of a clue. He always figured it was something involving, like, secrets, some sort of secretive organization. But one day his suspicions do get confirmed because he's hanging out at home, and Phil looks out the window and he sees two people walking up to the house who look like government agents. That's how he describes them. So I'm assuming it's like the black slacks, black jacket, black tie, white shirt. Typical Special Agent Dale Cooper, typical Fox Mulder attire, typical attire of the Men in Black. They're walking up to the house. Open up. Huh? What? George says as he gets up off the couch. Oh, man. Long day watching television. Being a retired military guy is nothing like it. But now it is time for me to answer the door. So he goes and he opens the door, and the two agents grab him, and George is like, no, not this time, no. He's a big crybaby. Come on, can't you just get kidnapped by the government without making a scene? No, guys, please, I said I wasn't going to tell anyone. They're dragging him off, and Phil's watching his father get kidnapped by these government agents. Now, to be fair, I don't know if that happened in the middle of the day. To be fair, I don't know if it happened at all, because here's the thing. This is one of those stories where you start to think, I don't think the guy made it up. I don't think Phil made this story up. The question is he hallucinating certain details, or did it actually happen, or is it somewhere in between? He just says, my dad got kidnapped by these guys who looked like government agents one day, and then my dad came back. But Phil starts to think, wow, this isn't my dad. This isn't my dad. I know my dad. I've known him for 15 years. This dude that looks like my dad, who's come back, isn't my dad. Can you imagine they're sitting around the dinner table and Phil's like, hey, Dad, what was up with that thing where those government agents grabbed you and dragged you out of the house and you were screaming, I swear I'll never tell anyone. George is like, well, let's just not talk about it. Let's not talk about me being dragged, kicking and screaming from the house, and now reappearing. And let's just not talk about it. Let's just pretend everything is normal. But the problem was everything wasn't normal. Phil started to notice these clues that something was wrong with his dad. First off, after the kidnapping and the return, Phil starts to notice that his dad is ruder than he used to be. Make rude comments. Hey, Phil, did you take a bath today? Never mind, don't answer that. I can smell you from here. And Phil's like, what? Phil's taking the trash out. And Dad leans out the window and goes, hey, Phil, while you're out there, why don't you just put yourself in the garbage can? Because you're trash. Nothing but trash. I'm all laughing. I'm the neighbor. I'm all, good one, Dad. Your son is trash. And Phil's all wiping away tears. He's like, why is my dad being so rude? Where's this coming from? He's never been like this before. I walk in to eat some dinner, and Dad goes, son, I think you should skip today's meal because you're getting a little fat. It's not even a joke. It's just an observation. It wasn't even clever. Phil's like, why are you being so rude, Dad? And Dad's like, no, I'm not. I'm the same dad I was before I was kidnapped. I'm like, what? So Phil starts to realize something's wrong with his dad because he's rude. That's sign one. Now let me ask you this. This is one of those things where you go, okay, maybe the dad was traumatized by being kidnapped by the government that he served loyally for so long. Maybe he deserves to be a little rude. Or possibly, people get ruder as they get older. If someone came to you and go, I think my dad is not my dad because he's rude to me now, you might go, do you have any other evidence? Which I would argue is much more compelling evidence. If I'm trying to prove that something great has changed in my dad since he was kidnapped, Phil goes, yeah, my dad would be rude to me. And also, I noticed something. He also had the magical ability to heal people simply by touching them. You're like, what? We should have started off with that one. Don't tell me about all the times he made fun of you, although that was funny. You should just say, I think my dad, something's wrong with my dad. He now has the ability to heal all wounds. Apparently, Phil says that when he's hurt, his dad will just touch him and the injury will heal itself. That's compelling evidence. If you can prove that to me, I'm going to believe whatever conspiracy theory you have coming up next. He goes, my dad can heal me when he touches me, which is interesting because he doesn't go into detail like how he's getting injured. We don't know why Phil's getting so injured in the first place, but he says his dad can heal him with a touch. Also, his dad would constantly talk. He'd go on rants, actually. He'd be sitting there, him and Phil would be watching television, and Dad would go, you know what? You humans, right? I mean, again, these are just dead giveaways. Something's wrong with your dad. I want to be like, I wonder why he's suddenly using the term you humans instead of us. He goes, you humans are just sheep. Nothing but cattle. Nothing. You're nothing to us. The great. And then he stops himself. He sits there and he talks about how humans are just cattle. Dad also keeps telling Phil, you want to know something, son? I know that I'm not your real dad. Phil's like, what? I know that I'm not your real dad, and you know who else knows that that I'm not your real dad? The secret government agency that kidnapped your real dad knows that that I know that I'm not your real dad. So guess what, son? He does air quotes. Now when he calls him son, guess what, son? You're gonna get kidnapped too. Oh yeah, they're gonna take you away, boy. Take you away like the sheep you are. And then the commercial breaks over. They go back to watching The Big Bang Theory. Sounds like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I can enjoy the rest of this episode. Phil says eventually that's what happens. At one point, Dad grabs Phil and takes him to this special forces group, is how he described it. So I'm assuming a bunch of military personnel. He's taken to this group, and they make him sign paperwork. And Phil's like sweating. He's like, oh no, I didn't even bring my pen. Oh man, can I use a pencil? Is that okay? And they're like, no, we'll get you a pen. Can't use a pencil sign document. He's sweating, and they make him sign a document. And they take him back home. I go, wait, what? So, I don't know, was it an NDA? If it is, he's violated it. He's posting this online. They turned his dad into a reptilian. Phil just signed a piece of paperwork, and they sent him back home. And he doesn't even tell us what the paperwork said. I don't even know if he knows what the paperwork said. I'd be honest. I don't read all of my contracts unless they're super... If they have to do with the show, I read everything. If it has to do with me, I'm like, whatever, I'll just sign at the bottom. If I was surrounded by military personnel and my alien father, who we'll very quickly learn is a full-on reptilian, I'm just skipping to the last page, right? Whatever's going to get this over with the quickest, let's get it done. He signs the paperwork. We don't know what it says. He may not know what it says. He goes back home, and at that point, he begins spying on his dad because he realizes something's up. I probably would have done this once he started healing the wounds. I probably would have left, honestly. I probably would have ran away. I would say there are certain times when you should run away from home. One of those would be if your father was turned into a shape-shifting alien from beyond, because that's what happened. He ignored all the warning signs, all the rude insults, and he begins spying on his dad, and sure enough, he sees one day his dad, when he doesn't know he's being watched, Dad opens his mouth and a reptilian tongue, a little snake tongue, slithered out of Dad's mouth. Ugh. But he still doesn't run away. Which you're like, Jason, quit encouraging teenagers to run away. You're like, oh, here's my new podcast, 10 reasons why you should run away. There's a certain point, I think, where okay, maybe not run away, but maybe just sleep at your best friend's house. Maybe find somewhere to go. You're like, all-night basketball, wow, this is fantastic. I don't even know how to play basketball, but I'm going to sit out here anyways. You know your dad's a reptilian at this point, and then, just to make things even weirder, at one point he comes home and he notices that his dad has a new best friend. A dwarf. I mean... That'd be dope if all of a sudden your dad is like, hey, I want you to meet my new best friend. His name is Johnny. And they're like, hey, nice to meet you. And it's a dwarf. You'd be like, oh, this is dope. Right? He's just like, there's this dude here who's, I don't know. You're like, why is that dope? Why is that dope? It's just the slightly shorter man. Well, you got to shake things up, right? You're kind of getting bored of being insulted and being healed and living with a reptilian. When all of a sudden there's a dwarf in your house, you go, this... Like, you didn't expect You didn't expect this. You thought maybe someday you'd come home, there'd be a giant egg in the living room. No, there's a dwarf. And the dad starts hanging out with this dwarf all the time. So, Phil, listen, I'm not going to say this is a bad guess. I'm not going to say it's a bad with everything that was going on. He doesn't have any proof to back this up. But he thinks, okay, well, if my dad's a reptilian... then this dwarf must be a gray alien in disguise. I mean, it's not a bad guess. It's not a terrible guess. But yeah, so he's just sitting there, and there's this dwarf walking around, and this alien, reptilian, in human form walking around. And I'm sure he's still getting rude comments from his dad. Phil just has to exist in this moment. Well, you would think that it's just going to be like 3 roommates now. Him, a dwarf, and his reptilian dad. But I don't know why it took so long to get to this. Eventually, they begin assaulting him, but not like physically. Well, it's hard to tell. The way he wrote this narrative is kind of hard to tell. This was also posted on Phantoms and Monsters. Phil said he was stabbed and then shot with I-beams. I-beams that were burning his skin, but he just said that they did it. So I don't know if it was his dad and the dwarf. We don't know. He says they stabbed him and shot him with I-beams and also put implants under his skin. And I think it happened over time. I don't think it was like one really busy weekend. And they could have been getting abducted by aliens. The dwarf could have had 6 other gray aliens come with them. It's the perfect disguise. He is getting attacked. He's getting stabbed, which would make sense, right? Because if you got stabbed, then you'd want an alien. You're like, Dad, I got stabbed. Don't trust that dwarf. I just lost $20 in a blackjack hand, and he wanted the money now, and he stabbed me, Dad. And then Dad's like, fine, you big crybaby, come over here. And he puts his hands on Phil's stomach, and he heals the wound. He's living with an alien dwarf and an alien dad. Well, here's the thing. Is it true? Is this story true? That it's like kind of dovetailed into, I think it was the episode we did Monday. It was all kind of like a companion piece. There's 2 creepy ways to look at it. One is that this guy's completely telling the truth. And, Dead Rabbit Radio, we believe in the existence of aliens. We believe that the individual elements of this story could be true. In essence, this story could be true. People getting replaced, shape-shifting, stuff like that. But it also, this is the interesting thing about the world of paranormal, it teeters on the world of insanity. And it could be by design, right? Because it's really hard to talk about these subjects without people going, you're insane. No one ever goes, I bet you sunlight helps plants grow. And someone goes, you're a nutcase. Well, actually, they probably did back when you were a caveman. They probably called you a nutcase. But it's possible that he's just having all these delusions. He says he found like an implant that was like an upside down triangle under his skin. Like, could that be like some sort of like ingrowing hair? He could be imagining all this stuff. His dad's going through a midlife crisis. He can't understand why, and he creates this story. And it could even be darker than that. He could be like, some of it could be just misunderstanding the events. Your dad was eating a lizard tongue, slurping it up like spaghetti. It could also be that he's suffering from some sort of mental delusion, mental illness, and he's hallucinating all of these events. It could be any one of the 3. I think the perfect way for aliens to infiltrate society would be on the fringes, would be among people who are mentally ill and are delusional, because no one's going to believe them anyways. I mean, if an alien researcher, sure, you could abduct people aboard your vessel, do experiments on them, or you could shapeshift into a human and get a job at a mental asylum. Or get a job at a regular hospital. Put implants in them all day long. So, he's saying that this, it's scary either way, because if it's a mental delusion, then his dad is not really a reptilian, and you wonder what happens if this kid ever goes, well, I need to fight back. I mean, because what happens when that dwarf, who's real, I'm assuming the dwarf's out of all of it, I was like, the dwarf's probably a real human, a real guy, a buddy of the dad. One day they're watching television, smoking cigars, while Phil is secretly heating up a cast iron frying pan in the oven, getting it nice and hot, and he grabs a pot holder, and then he walks out, and he bashes the dwarf over the head with the frying pan. You go, why did he heat it up? It's not going to hurt anymore. If you get hit over the head with 10 pounds of cast iron, your first inclination isn't going to be like, ooh, that's hot, ooh, hot. Your brains are going to come shooting out of your ears. Your skull's going to crack. You're not going to worry about the 3/5 of a second where your skin slightly got sizzled by this hot frying pan. Well, anyways, bash the dwarf's brain in. And then he's swinging at your dad, and your dad blocks it, and all of a sudden you're in this life and death. This would be a good reason to heat up a frying pan in the oven. Is that if you're swinging it around, giving all sorts of good advice on this episode. If you're swinging it around and someone tries to grab it from you, they're going to burn their hands. Actually, this is a pretty good idea. So you put the cat right, take these notes down. Phil's listening to this episode. He looks over his dad and his dwarf. We're sitting on a couch. He's like, oh man, what a great time to try out this new podcast. You heat up the cast iron frying pan so you can use it as a weapon. You get like an UV glove or something like that so your hand won't burn. But if someone tries to grab it from that, that's diabolical. I've never thought of that before. But anyways, dad tried, and his hands are burning. He smells the scent of his own flesh cooking in his cast iron frying pan. Of course, he's going to let it go when he can. His fingers are starting to get cooked to it. And then the son beats his head in and goes, die, you reptilian bastard, die, die. And he learns too late. And he learns in that moment that a reptilian brain looks an awful lot like a human brain. That would be the worst, right? That would really be the worst. In this case, the best case scenario is that it is real. Not for Phil, not for Phil, of course, but you know what I mean. Like he could leave and try to live his own life. He posted well, actually, think about it. This happened back in '95. This guy's an adult by now. He's still living with his dad, which I'm not making fun of adults who live with their dad. I'm making fun of the fact that if in 1995 you were 15 years old and all this stuff was going on. And now we jump ahead, like 30 years? You're 45 years old. And it's okay if you're still living with your parents. I'm not making fun of that. I'm making fun if you think your dad's a reptilian and the dwarf is a gray. And you're like, you know what? Rent is really expensive. So I'm going to live with this possible alien invader and his faithful companion. At any point, I could be kidnapped and turned into a reptilian myself. But it sure beats trying to pay rent on the other side of town. I think at a certain point, Phil, you do have to move out. I'm assuming at this point he has. I'm assuming that at this point that he has. I got no problem with people who live with their parents for 40, 50 years. That's not the thing. But if you think your parents might actually be from another dimension or another reality, if you think that actually they're not even your real parents, they were kidnapped and replaced by reptilians, it's time to move out. It's interesting, though, because we do have this... I'll read you how this ends, and I think this is kind of shows where his head is at. He said, Phil, when he wrote this, he goes, quote, I never told anyone as I was so scared of how these entities seemed to be able to operate with impunity, and like nothing could stop them. They also conducted very horrible activities. That's kind of interesting. He leaves that very vague. I don't know if against him, if they're doing stuff in the community. But, quote, they also conducted very horrible activities and what seemed like mental brainwashing experiments on me. He continues, after all these years, I'm still scared to this day. Okay, so yeah, this was posted pretty recently, and he is writing about what happened in 1995. I was wondering, in my head, I wonder if this was written in 1985. But after all these years, I'm still scared to this day, but I believe it was time to come forward. I just wonder what happened to my real dad. Unquote. It's interesting because it does now, like when you think about it, he did believe this back then, and he still believes this now. 30 years later. He still believes in this story. Was it true? Was it a delusion? Is it still a delusion? Is the father out there disguised as a reptilian to this day? We don't have the answers to any of that. And what's interesting is neither does Phil. Phil has what he believes are the answers, but is he having a mental breakdown? Did he see something real but misinterpreted it? Or is he actually telling the truth? And if he's telling the truth, then that ending is probably the saddest part of all. What happened to my real dad? He has to wonder where his father actually is. But when it comes to stories of reptilians, sometimes not knowing is actually better. Because if his father was abducted and replaced by a reptilian, there's really not much use for the original dad. They may have gained whatever information they needed from him, if any. because we're talking about a interstellar or interdimensional race that intelligence far outstrips our own. You may hope that your dad is still alive out there somewhere. But when it comes to reptilians, it's better just to not ask too many questions. Because most likely your dad met a very violent death. And even worse than that, his suffering was not ended with his demise. All of his years of training, all of his experiences as a human, all of his time spent with his son being a father, all of that stuff no longer mattered. Because now he was just a piece of flesh, meat, food for the reptilian overlords who do operate with complete impunity. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. TikTok is @DeadRabbitRadio. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal conspiracy and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day. I'm glad you listened to it